means you can eat. Oh, I'm ready.
Full send.
Welcome to another episode of Whiskey Society. I'm your host, Josh Judd. Tonight we'll be talking with Tim, Sam, and James from the Law's Whiskey House. Law's Whiskey House is revolutionizing what I thought was possible in the world of making whiskey. Based in Denver, Colorado, they start by growing their grains and finish by bottling the aged whiskey and control every step of the process in between. This enables them to create the amazing whiskeys that we'll be talking about tonight. I would also like to thank everybody for tuning in this evening. And if you have a nice big glass of whiskey in your hand, take a sip. And if it's Law's whiskey, we'd love to hear what you think about it in the comments section below. On behalf of the Seven staff, I would like to thank everyone who was able to donate to our GoFundMe page. It is truly appreciated. Let's meet our first guest, Mr. Tim Zohn. Tim is the California whiskey enthusiast for Laws and has had numerous appearances at Seven Grand's Whiskey Societies over the years. Tim, how are you doing this evening?
Can't complain. A wonderful Friday night.
It's good to see you again. How are you holding up during this quarantine?
I'm doing just great, man. I've been getting a lot of projects finished.
Nice. There's plenty of time these days. Have you been doing anything to keep pass the time throughout the weeks, or?
Yeah, I've been doing a ton of traveling. I was actually in Japan on Tuesday. Then I was in Scotland on Wednesday. Then I visited Kentucky on Thursday. And if you can't tell that I was drinking my way through those countries, then yeah. So yeah, I've been traveling and time traveling.
That's awesome. Hopefully you're wearing a mask out there. So I realized that I've really been missing live music lately. Almost every day I'm like, oh, I wish we could go see a show tonight. Is there anything you miss most about the pre-COVID-19 world?
The one thing that I honestly miss the most is being able to jump on a plane and come down and see you guys in San Diego. I mean, one of my favorite things about living in California, I mean, me being up here in San Francisco, is that when the weather's bad here, with my job, I could just jump on a plane to come see you, and then we would talk about whiskey in front of a bunch of people, and then I would get paid to do that as a job. Not too shabby.
It is a rough job that we have drinking whiskey all the time. Where are you joining us from tonight, Tim?
Oh, from San Francisco, California.
Awesome. I love San Francisco. All right. Let's talk about my favorite subject, whiskey. Tim, do you have what is your most clear first memory of drinking liquor?
Of drinking liquor?
Yeah, would you have a fond memory of your first experience?
I have several memories. I don't know how many were fond. I would say it probably started back in Arizona, working at a country club, and I was bartending at this country club at the age of 19 because it's legal to serve alcohol in Arizona at 19, even though you still have to be 21 to consume it. And obviously, I waited, those additional years before ever tasting a sip of alcohol. But my clearest memories of really being introduced to cocktails and alcohol was having a bunch of the golf club members know that I knew nothing about making a cocktail, and them teaching me how to make martinis and Manhattans on Sunday afternoons, uh, telling me how they make them at home or what I should be doing. And with without a doubt, I think that really sparked my curiosity in cocktails and especially whiskey, because there was something sort of romantic about drinking a scotch on a summer day, after 18 holes of golf, and I mean, it was something that seemed very uh, nostalgic and old school, especially in this grand setting of big old wooden walls and plush couches and gentlemen and ladies sitting around enjoying a scotch at the end of the day.
That's awesome. Do you have a favorite whiskey cocktail?
Bourbon old fashioned. It's
Sweet.
there is no cocktail that I think is more perfect than an old fashioned. I mean, if you're not going to drink your whiskey neat or straight, just simply adding a couple of dashes of bitters, a little bit of sugar, and then a twist of either orange or lemon, I think is just, there is something about the simplicity of that cocktail that makes it the perfect cocktail.
I would completely agree with you. Tim, would you mind talking a little bit about American whiskey and kind of run us through the categories that encompass that phrase?
Yeah, American whiskey is a really, really interesting category. I mean, when you think of American whiskey, realistically, everybody jumps straight to bourbon. And more recently, I'd say people also think of rye. And when you think of bourbon and rye as pretty much the backbone of American whiskey, you are talking about, I would say, the majority of whiskeys that are out there. But America is also known for creating some really, really killer corn whiskey. And then I would say recently, in the past, especially in the past 10 years or so, American single malts are really starting to come into their own. And so when you're talking about bourbon, the heritage behind bourbon and, the stories that come from bourbon are really steep in American culture. And there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of information out there. I think for the longest time, people thought that bourbon could only come from Bourbon County, Kentucky. But I was actually, and we've talked about this over the years. But I was actually doing the research on where you can make bourbon in the United States, and all 50 states are definitely able to make bourbon. There, I believe, is actually even a distillery in Hawaii that is making something close to a bourbon, if not a bourbon currently. And then I was actually reading a really interesting blog. The gentleman behind the blog, the Whiskey Jug, actually wrote to the TTB to find out if U.S. territories were actually included. And apparently the TTB wrote back and said that there is nothing in the law that excludes it. So I don't know. Maybe we'll see a bourbon coming from American Samoa sometime.
That is true. Some Puerto Rican bourbons. That's what I want to drink, dude. So, in the world of craft whiskey, which I know you have a lot of experience with, there are two major categories. You're going to have the new craft distilleries that are popping up, basically sourcing their whiskey from other distilleries that already have established backstock. And there's going to be distilleries that are creating everything on their own. They're growing the grains and then distilling it and bottling it, and they call this grain to glass. Could you walk us through the difference between these categories of craft whiskey?
Yeah, I mean it's really interesting to see the evolution of how smaller distilleries are kind of coming into their own over the last few years. I mean, for a long time there was definitely an idea of, well, we need to get, the lights on at the distillery. We need to pay the employees, so we'll make every spirit we can under the sun, from vodka to gin. We'll source some barrels from some of the bigger houses, and then we'll, eventually get our own whiskey out there. And totally fine, very, very cool. There's some phenomenal people doing some phenomenal whiskeys, and some really great distilleries that are doing some stuff where they're purchasing from different distilleries and blending, which is, again, also really cool. But one of the coolest sort of things that I'm kind of seeing is people sort of focusing in on one spirit and doing one thing perfectly. And when you're speaking about whiskey, especially something like a small craft distillery, it's incredibly hard to start up a distillery, make some killer whiskey, put it into a barrel, and go, okay, I'm not going to do anything with it for several years, and then once it's ready, we'll release it to the public. And that is actually why I joined the team at Lost. I went to Denver, Colorado. I met Al Laws, and I saw that he had basically taken the longest, hardest, most expensive way of starting a distillery, and he did it because it was the right way of doing it. I think it's really cool to see that American craft small distilleries are uh, making that sacrifice to pay homage to the heritage of whiskey and to pay homage to that, idea that there is no replacement for time.
I agree. I agree 100%. So, Law's Whiskey is the first new distillery I've ever heard of that waited 3 years to release any product. Usually, you see distilleries creating a gin or a vodka or sourcing whiskey from another distillery to start generating revenue. The reason they do this is because it takes an enormous amount of capital to get a distillery off the ground and running. But this would go against Law's Whiskey House's motto, which is no shortcuts. And joining us tonight from Denver, Colorado, we have Sam and James. Sam is the senior distiller with Laws, and James is currently holding the glorious title of Barrel House Manager. Thanks for joining us tonight, gentlemen. How are you doing?
Well, thanks for having us.
Hey, good to be here.
Awesome, awesome. How is it in Denver right now?
Today was a beautiful day. A lot of people can't go outside to enjoy it, but still a beautiful day.
For your quick walk around the block with a mask.
Yeah.
So one of the things I read that I was super stoked about is you guys have 2 farms and you're growing heirloom grains. Sam, would you be able to tell us a little bit more about this, and James as well, if you could kind of touch on the grains you're growing and the farms and all that cool stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to be clear, on farms, we rely on the work of some really awesome people, hardworking people who know grain that we do. I don't think we could get down there and get the same quality grain. But we're sourcing our grain from eastern Colorado. That's where our corn comes from. And then we're sourcing our barley, our rye, and our wheat from southern Colorado in the San Luis. For us, the grain is everything. So the grain of the San Luis Valley is grown in a really unique climate. It's a high elevation, so it's dry mountain weather. It's warm in the daytime, and it's cool at night. So it puts a little stress on the plant, and it creates a hearty, full flavor grain that is essential to what we do. Colorado Malting Company in Alamosa has been growing grain for generations, and they know exactly where to plant each grain specifically to get the most out of it. And we're seeing grain that's high in protein and provides a really full flavor.
Yeah, I think the grain. Oh, sorry. I think the grain that I'm probably most excited about that they produce is the rye. It's an heirloom variety called San Luis Valley Rye. It's really crossbred several strains over numerous generations, came with European immigrants in the late 1800s. It's a really hardy grain. They plant it in the fall, so it vernalizes, and it really takes off in the spring. It starts sprouting immediately. It just goes nuts once the snow melts, and they have to actually kind of cut it back a little bit around this time of year because it goes so crazy that they don't want it to grow too fast. But it gives us really an amazing flavor in our whiskey, and I think our whiskey wouldn't be the same without it.
Yeah, and then the San Luis Valley also sits on an ancient lake bed. So there's still a lake there, but it's underground. So although it's a dry climate, they're able to give it water whenever it needs it.
Very cool.
I can tell you,
it's tasting good, Tim says. So I know a lot of distilleries that I talked to previously, they don't really care as much as you guys do with grain, and it really shows in the final product. If that's going to be the base of your pyramid, it makes sense that you would spend as much time as you guys do really investing in that grain product. A lot of other distilleries talk about their water source. Do you guys have a cool Rocky Mountain water source that you use?
Yeah, I mean, all the water in the Front Range is coming straight from the Rocky Mountains, from the snowpack. We're lucky to be the first people in a very long supply chain that gets to use that water. So it's definitely high quality. I think a lot of people will be familiar with a lot of the Denver and Colorado beers that are made with that water. And they're pretty great.
The list is long. Let's talk a little bit about fermentation. What are you guys doing? Are you guys doing different fermentations for your bourbons and your ryes, or is it essentially the same? What are those times? And if you could kind of walk us through that process a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first we'll start with mashing. Because we're making a 4-grain bourbon, it took a little while to figure out exactly how to cook it properly to express each grain. That's always been a goal of the 4-grain bourbon, is so you can really taste and pick out each of those flavor profiles. Well known. So we do a slower, long mash. We're adding the different temperatures, resting them, and then continuing the process. Our mashing takes about 6 hours. One of the things about Denver water is it's a little bit higher in pH, and we use traditional sour mash. So we're adding backset, which is more acidic, the last distillation run to every new batch in the cooker. So after that 6 hours, we're going to transfer it over to a fermentation vessel. We have a house yeast that we use that's a pretty aggressive and hardy yeast, but it gives us all those nice ester profiles that we're looking for. Fermentation is done in oak, so it's exposed to the climate we have and the environment for wild yeast bacteria that live in the Laws distillery. Our ferments are done at around 85 degrees, so they go pretty quickly, and we ferment for about 72 hours.
Nice. I wanted to visit the distillery and taste it right now. I love the smell of fermentation in the morning. It smells like victory. Talk us a little bit about your stills and the distilling process. I'm just super curious about what your equipment is like and how you make all your products.
Yeah, that's where we're going to get a lot of the flavor profile. We use a pot still from Vendome, made by Vendome in Louisville, Kentucky. As far as we're concerned, they make the best stills. They've been around forever. They make the stills for all the big guys and for a lot of different processes of distillation. So we do a double distillation. So we'll do a stripping run first, where we add that mash when it's done fermenting to the still. We want collect those. That run generally is around 8 hours. Once we collect that alcohol, we'll add it back to the still for our spirit run. These runs are done a lot slower, where we can clearly separate out the alcohols that we want to add to the spirit. We're going to set those out, run the hearts for a long period, and then make that final cut into tails, which is where we get a lot of flavor as well.
Sounds delicious. Once this world opens back up, I'm going to be sure to swing by Denver, say hi to my 7 grand family out there, and try some of that dog. It sounds
We'd
delicious.
love to have you.
Awesome. And so once we have the white dog all distilled, then it's going to go into barrels. James will be able to help us explain a little bit about this. If you could go over what size barrels we're using, what is the char level like, you could run us through kind of the nitty gritty. And one of the things I'm very curious about is your day-to-day life. Now, your title is the Barrel House Manager, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So does this mean that you pretty much just drink whiskey all day long and stumble around a warehouse full of barrels?
No, I can't. Definitely can't do that. Although my job does involve a lot of tasting whiskey, so it's a lot of spitting whiskey on the floor. But that's how we do it around there. So, but yeah,
I totally.
Yeah. So once the distillery makes the white dog, they throw it into barrels. Our facilities, our distillery and warehouse, are separated about 2 blocks apart. So they'll load up the flatbed truck with some racks of barrels and bring it over to the warehouse. So we get 53-gallon barrels from Independent Stave Company in Lebanon, Missouri. Everything that we do is a char level 3, with the exception of a few barrels that we kind of peppered in there just for fun. We've experimented a little bit with some other cooperages, but we're pretty well dedicated to Independent Stave Company, just because they can give us what we need and the quantity that we need. We've got a big, a growing special finish series that we're doing. I think we have in the area of about 45 or 50 specialty finished barrels that we're throwing bourbon, rye, wheat into cognac and Armagnac barrels, as well as Calvados and various wine barrels as well. So it's enough to keep me busy all day, every day.
I believe it. And is that something that you guys recently laid down? Are you currently waiting for those barrels to hit perfection, or what state are those barrels in right now?
The specially finished barrels?
Yeah, the ones that you were talking about where you're doing the new project where you have some Armagnac and some Cognac barrels.
Yeah, we started that probably about 4 years ago, and we've released a handful of them. We call them the Special Finish series, but
Okay.
we've actually switched the title now on the label to the Experiential series, which kind of opens up. It's just the idea that, we make so many variations on our whiskeys, and really the whole point of this is just to explore whiskey in many forms, and so that's why we call it the Experiential series. But to answer your question, we probably, it's not a new project. We've just been accumulating more and more barrels every year. Every few months we get a delivery in from France. We work closely with Vic Bard. They do a lot of recouping of used cognac barrels and Armagnac barrels and stuff like that. So we're just kind of continually laying down more and more barrels, whether that's bourbon, rye, malt, and just doing the various special finishes. So most recently, we got a 60 hectoliter cognac fooder, which is a beautiful tank. It was very nicely restored. It's in great condition. It's a 50-year-old vessel, so it's been a lot of fun playing around with that. And so the idea with that is that we're going to slowly get a sort of a Solera aging system together, where we can make the cognac finished bourbon more of a mainline product. So keep an eye out for that.
That's awesome. I 100% support that project. And I look forward to tasting it when it does come out. That's going to be awesome. So do you guys do anything special with your warehouse? Is it temperature controlled? Are you rotating barrels? Or is it, can you kind of tell us a little bit about what the warehouse looks like and where you guys are aging your product?
Yeah, so it is temperature controlled. It maintains temperature pretty well as is. We keep it in the low to mid 70s in the winter, and in the summer it maybe gets up into the high 70s. I've never seen it up to 80 degrees. Fortunately, our climate it's so dry here in Denver that we can run a swamp cooler in the summertime and take advantage of that evaporative cooling, which is nice.
Yeah.
Prior to our current facility, we aged all of our whiskey in the distillery, and we had wild temperature swings, humidity swings all the time, with the seasons, with daily operations, and so we're kind of getting used to a new sort of aging environment right now, and I think a little bit more stability in the climate is going to be good for us, because we want to take our barrels, older and older. So I think that the stability in climate is going to allow for that.
Definitely. I know when I was in Louisville, most recently when we went to Buffalo Trace, they had this whole little refrigerator section where they keep all their extra whiskey. So that's how they're able to make the Eagle Rare very, very rare. Is they basically have this temperature controlled warehouse, so it enables them to elongate that finishing process. And I imagine in a climate that fluctuates as much as Denver, that's pretty important. So
yeah, definitely. Cool. Yeah. It's been interesting to kind of track just how the whiskey is aging a little bit differently in a more moderate climate in the warehouse. It's been pretty cool.
And how many racks are there? Is it multiple stories? Is it one level?
Yep, it's a single level, ground level. We stack the barrels 5 racks high. Although we could probably go 6 high. I don't think the fire department would really appreciate that. But 5 high is certainly good enough for us. And we don't intentionally rotate our stock. Although this year we just started doing full inventory of our stock. And so in order to do that, we have to pull down entire rows of barrels, and then shuffle down stacks, which in order to count everything, we have to move it. And when you're moving it, you're rotating the stock. So we're not doing it so that we're getting even aging. It's more just to get a good count on everything and make sure we have we know the physical location of every barrel.
So I'm really excited to hear about all the whiskeys you guys make. Tim, I can see the tops of the bottles behind you. Could you walk us through the lineup of whiskeys that you guys are producing or available for sale in most liquor stores?
Yeah, so in California, we brought in our 4-grain bourbon, as well as our rye whiskey, and then we also have our bottled and bond versions of the bourbon and rye. So our bottled and bond, which Sam has in the bottom corner there. It's a little spicier, a little bit more time in barrel, and one of the coolest things about what Laws has going for it is our kind of bottled and bond series. So we have a bonded warehouse. I'm sure that everybody watching this has heard of bonded whiskeys, and we're doing 4 different bonded whiskeys currently. I'm correct on that, right, Sam? Do we have anything secretly
No,
going
that's right.
on? So we have the bonded wheat, which if you get up to Denver, Colorado, stop by our distillery and pick up a bottle. We're going to be doing a curbside pickup for the foreseeable future. We also have a bonded malt whiskey, which is some pretty cool stuff, as well as our bonded rye and our bonded bourbon. One of the things that you're going to find up in Denver that we don't have out here in California yet is that the bonded whiskeys are all 6 years. So the last of the bonded 4-year whiskey that we have is here in California. So everybody out here in California, we have literally the last opportunity to pick up our 4-year bonded whiskeys. You won't find it anywhere else in the country.
It's one of our favorites too.
And our founder, Al Laws, it's one of his favorites as well.
And Tim, actually, we do have one more bonded whiskey. It is a bonded 2-grain bourbon whiskey. When we were making corn whiskey, we were splitting the white spirit into new cooperage and into used cooperage. So to be corn whiskey, it has to go into used cooperage, or at least uncharred cooperage. And the stuff that we put into new cooperage, although it's the same mash bill as the corn whiskey, so we released that as a bonded 2-grain bourbon whiskey.
So I heard you guys talking about a few times over our conversation about a 4-grain bourbon. Could you guys enlighten me on what that actually means?
Yeah. So
Anybody can take this question?
Sure. Traditionally, obviously, bourbons have to be majority corn. The secondary grain is usually going to be rye or wheat. Rye tends to be of a bully grain. It's got big, bold flavors. The black pepper spice note that I think we all know well. Wheat, on the other hand, can be a little bit lighter, more elegant, some of those floral notes. So to make a whiskey with all 4 grains can be a little challenging. Taste everything. And that's what we worked so hard to do in the beginning. We think that you can pick out each flavor in our whiskey from start to finish. Definitely the rye spice is prevalent. You get some of those sweeter honey notes on the mid palate, and definitely some of that nuttiness from the barley.
I definitely get that.
And if anyone's had corn whiskey, of course we know the lighter, sweet ethanol burn that you get from corn whiskey. So
when it comes to our 4-year bourbon, one of the things that you will notice is that it's an uncommon style that you won't see a lot of. But with that craft distillery focus that we were talking about earlier, making something that was unique to the terroir of Colorado, something that really encompassed a style of whiskey that's outside of what maybe you have tried out of Kentucky or other places in the United States. It really fit with our sort of ethos, our style, and our culture. And it's a flavor profile that really works for where we're from and what we like to make.
So you guys have been making amazing whiskey. I've had the pleasure of trying it multiple times. It's $7 grand. One of the things I read that thought was really cool was you say it takes a village to make this amazing whiskey, and that nobody has the title of master distiller at Law's Whiskey House. Could you guys tell me and our viewers a little bit about the philosophy behind this?
Yeah, sure. When we're looking to add staff, we're looking for people with different backgrounds, different experience, different knowledge. We want people who can come to us different something maybe we weren't seeing in our process. We make all of our decisions as a group. We get together every week. We taste all the spirit that we made. If we're going to make any changes, we have a healthy debate over a whiskey and talk it out.
Yeah, it's really nice that we run things from the top down in a pretty egalitarian sort of way. I mean, everybody has a voice in what happens. Like Sam said, it's all not necessarily for compromise. It's more just so that everybody has input and everybody can help steer the ship, which has been. I will admit that sometimes that's challenging, but I think in the end we all learn a lot about what we're doing, learn a lot about each other, and I think it's fantastic.
It's awesome, inspiring way to run a company, and I think it really does show when you taste your final product. I mean, it takes a family to create something that is redefining what it means to be a craft distillery. I definitely respect that. If we have any guests out there that have questions, please leave them in our comments section below. We will be answering them. A question that we had earlier from a gentleman named Matt was, do you guys have any plan on using some of the trees around your area in Colorado? Obviously, we're familiar with the vast forest of Colorado. Are you guys have any plans on finishing in an aspen or birch?
You know, not to my knowledge. I mean, we haven't really discussed anything like that. I'm certainly open to doing something like that. We don't really have any native trees in the area that would lend themselves well to finishing whiskey. I know a handful of distilleries do the aspenwood thing, which is pretty cool. I'm not opposed to doing that. Again, it would have to be kind of a consensus sort of thing. We're always changing. We're always trying new things and tweaking our recipes, tweaking our special finishes and stuff like that. So, you know, it's certainly a possibility, but right now we don't have anything like that in the works.
Yeah, in my head, I just imagine aspen trees being sappy, but I don't know. Maybe that's just my imagination.
Sappy. Yeah, probably not too sappy. I think they lend a bitterness from the whiskeys that I've had that have little aspen in them, which could be interesting. You know, we have a lot of cottonwood around here. We did do, I mean, this is sort of related, I guess. Colorado Malting Company does custom smoked malts. They offer a cottonwood smoked malt, which we have, but we've done oak smoked malt and peat smoked malt just for a couple variations on our malt whiskey, which haven't been released yet. So maybe we could do something like a cottonwood smoke, because that's a local tree around here, and certainly aspen as well. So that could be pretty cool, actually.
Yeah, sounds cool to me. Another question we had was if you could talk a little bit about the yeast you guys are using and talk a little bit about fermentation.
Sure. We're using an ale yeast that's bred for whiskey production. It's bred to be tough because the situation we put the yeast in can cause a little stress. Because it's a warmer temperature, it's a fast fermentation, and the alcohol content gets pretty high. I saw someone ask how long it was. It was 72 hours is how fast we ferment. So you're pitching it into an environment. James, maybe you want to talk about yeast a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a handful of different tests on yeast. So we tried Scotch whiskey yeast. We've tried a couple of Belgian ale yeasts. I believe a couple grains of champagne yeast. Again, like every recipe that we've done for our core brands of whiskeys, we've done at least 5 to 10 slight variations on those. And in the end, the end consumer might not taste the difference, but for us, really like one of the funnest parts of the job is to crack open a barrel that's been aging for 3, 4, 5 years that we used Scotch whiskey yeast on, and taste that side by side with our house strain.
And we do.
On my end of,
Excuse me, sorry, James.
Yeah, on my end of things, that's certainly one of the most engaging things. It's a lot of fun.
And we will have some of those experimental yeast batches coming online, and we'll release them side by side. So,
yeah.
I 100% looked forward to having you guys in our actual bar and tasting those whiskeys, because that sounds really awesome.
Yeah.
Another question we got was, Denver is a hot spot for great beer. Any projects that lend themselves to showing the ability of local beer makers as part of the mash?
well, there are some distilleries out there that distill beer. They generally call it beer schnapps. We don't like to pass anything. We're pretty focused on whiskey, and we run pretty hot and heavy. So I don't think we'll be taking down production offline to distill any beer in the near future. But
Which makes total sense, being that you guys waited those years to let your whiskey actually mature to like when it was ready to be released. Like, yeah, don't cut any steps, no shortcuts, guys. Another question we got was, where I lost it. Oh no, live TV, guys. Here we go.
I believe there was a question about what the best mixer for Law's whiskey is, and I can answer that with Law's whiskey. So you take 1 part Law's whiskey and you add 1 part Law's whiskey, and then you put that into a glass.
Sounds complicated, but maybe our guests will be able to pull it off.
Yeah, my favorite is just a handful of nice 4-grain bourbon, a couple dashes of bitters.